Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us.
It's great to be back.
Today, we're going to be tackling something pretty big.
Yeah.
The Ten Commandments. They've been around for centuries.
Oh, yeah. Thousands of years.
And they've had a major impact on so many different areas of life.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, you think about law,
Ethics,
morality.
pop culture.
It's really fascinating how
Yeah.
these principles from, ancient times
Yeah.
have transcended their original context and still resonate with us today.
They really have. And you know what I always found fascinating about the Ten Commandments?
What's that?
Is that origin story.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Moses going up Mount Sinai
Talk about dramatic.
to receive these laws from God, like that's a powerful image.
It really sets the stage, doesn't it?
It's
I mean, it establishes the Ten Commandments not just as some random rules,
Right.
but as a covenant, a sacred agreement between God and his people.
so it's more than just do this, don't do that.
Exactly.
It's like a relationship.
Exactly. It's a two-way street. God promises to protect and guide his people,
Okay.
and in return, they agree to live by these principles.
That's interesting because it's not just a top-down kind of law-giving situation.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're in this together.
Exactly. It's about building a relationship, establishing a bond based on mutual trust and responsibility.
So how are these commandments actually structured?
Wow.
I remember something about two tablets.
Right. You
Yeah.
got it. There are two tablets, and each one focuses on a different aspect of life.
Mhm.
The first tablet deals with the relationship between humans and God.
Okay.
It lays out the ground rules, so to speak.
Makes sense.
No other gods before me. Don't take God's name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy.
Got it.
These are like the foundational principles for relating to the divine.
Okay, so the first tablet is all about how we connect with God.
Exactly.
What about the second tablet?
Well, the second tablet shifts the focus to relationships between people.
Okay, so how we treat each other.
Precisely. Things like don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't bear false witness against your neighbor.
It's like basic guidelines for being a decent human being.
You got it? Even if you set aside the religious aspect for a moment.
Right.
The second tablet is all about ethical behavior, how we interact with one another in a just and moral way.
And I'm guessing even within these seemingly straightforward commands,
Oh, absolutely.
there are layers of meaning that go much deeper than just the surface level.
There are nuances, interpretations, historical context, all sorts of things that add depth and complexity to these commandments.
So let's dive into some specifics, shall we?
Let's do it.
Let's start with thou shalt not kill.
Right.
Pretty clear cut on the surface, right?
It seems that way.
Don't murder people.
Right.
Pretty simple.
But there's a lot more to it than that.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
Yeah, I mean, it raises all sorts of questions, doesn't it?
Like what?
Well, for starters, what about other forms of violence? War, self-defense, euthanasia, capital punishment. These are all issues that stem from this one commandment.
It's like this one sentence opens up this Pandora's box of ethical dilemmas.
It really does. And it forces us to consider not just the act itself, but the motivations behind it.
Okay, so the context matters.
The context, the intent, the consequences, it all plays a role in how we interpret and apply this commandment.
That's interesting because it's not just about the action, it's about the whole picture.
Exactly.
Mm.
And it highlights the complexity of morality. There are often gray areas, difficult choices, and no easy answers.
That's true. And speaking of gray areas, what about thou shalt not covet?
Ah, yes, that one always gets people talking.
It always felt a little, I don't know, intrusive to me.
How so?
Well, like, who are they to tell me what I can and can't desire?
It is interesting, isn't it? Because this commandment isn't about actions, it's about thoughts. It's about controlling your desires, not letting envy and greed consume you.
So don't covet your neighbor's possessions,
Right.
their spouse, their success.
Exactly. It's about contentment, gratitude, being happy with what you have.
You know, it's funny because in a way, this commandment almost foreshadows modern mindfulness practices.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Like being aware of those covetous thoughts, recognizing them without judgment.
It's about cultivating a sense of inner peace, isn't it?
Exactly. It's like a built-in system for mental well-being.
Like that connection.
Yeah,
It shows how these ancient principles can still have relevance in our modern lives.
totally. And then there's remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy.
Yes. This one is particularly relevant in our always-on hustle culture.
Right. Like everybody's always busy, always connected.
Exactly. And this commandment reminds us to take a break, to rest, to recharge.
It's like a divine mandate for self-care.
You could say that. It's about recognizing that we're not machines, We need time to rejuvenate both physically and mentally.
And it's not just about sleeping in on Sunday morning.
Right. It's about dedicating time to something larger than ourselves, whether that's spiritual practices, spending time with loved ones, or simply disconnecting from the daily grind.
It's like a built-in mental health day, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think even those who aren't religious can benefit from that kind of intentional break.
Totally. It's a reminder that rest is not a luxury, it's a necessity.
Absolutely. It's essential for our well-being and our ability to function at our best.
So we've got these individual commandments, each with their own depth and nuances.
Right.
But how have they actually impacted the world beyond the religious sphere?
Oh, their impact is huge.
I mean, these things were written thousands of years ago.
Oh, I know.
Do they still hold weight today?
They absolutely do. Their influence can be seen in everything from our legal systems to our ethical frameworks to our pop culture.
No way, really.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty amazing how these ancient principles have shaped the course of history.
So, give me an example. How have they actually influenced things like law?
Well, think about some of the most basic laws we have. Prohibitions against theft, murder, perjury.
Okay.
Those are all rooted in the Ten Commandments.
Wait, so they went from tablets on a mountain to actual legal codes?
Exactly. Over time, those principles have been codified and incorporated into the legal systems of many societies.
That's amazing. So they had a direct impact on the development of law.
They did. And it goes even deeper than that. The very concept of a universal moral code, this idea that certain actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of your culture or religion,
Yeah.
that's heavily influenced by the Ten Commandments.
So even though they come from a specific religious tradition, those core ideas have become almost secularized in a way.
Precisely. You can see their echoes in human rights declarations, in social justice movements, in the ethical principles that guide many professions.
So it's like these commandments planted the seeds for a broader understanding of morality.
They provided a framework for thinking about right and wrong that has resonated across cultures and throughout history.
That's fascinating. And I bet you can even see their influence in pop culture.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the iconic movie, The Ten Commandments.
Oh, yeah.
It's a testament to how deeply these ideas have permeated our collective consciousness.
You're right. Those commandments are everywhere, from law books to movie screens.
Exactly. They're woven into the fabric of our culture.
Okay, so we've established that they've had a huge impact.
For sure.
But here's the big question.
What's that?
Are the Ten Commandments still relevant in our modern, often secular world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. What do you think?
Well, it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Of course.
On the one hand, we live in a diverse world with a wide range of beliefs and values.
Right. Not everyone subscribes to the religious framework these commandments come from.
Exactly. So, in that sense, you could argue that they're not as relevant as they once were.
Okay, I see that point, but
On the other hand,
yeah.
even if you strip away the religious context, those core principles, respecting life, being honest, treating others fairly,
Right.
those are pretty universal, aren't they?
They are. Those are the basic building blocks for a functioning society, no matter what you believe.
Exactly.
Hey.
So in that sense, you could argue that they're more relevant than ever.
Okay, so it's not a simple yes or no answer.
Not at all. It depends on how you interpret them, how you apply them to the complexities of modern life.
So maybe it's less about the literal interpretation and more about the spirit of these principles.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Like how they can guide us in tackling the complex issues we face today.
Exactly. Think about the global challenges we're grappling with right now. Inequality, violence, climate change, political polarization.
Yeah, those are some big ones.
They are.
Yeah.
And I think those core values of respect, justice, and responsibility could offer some guidance in navigating those challenges.
So maybe going back to basics, to these fundamental principles, could be a way to find common ground.
Potentially, even when we disagree on so much else.
It's like a shared ethical framework that we can all draw upon.
Exactly. And I think that's a powerful idea.
It is. But let's be real, it's not all sunshine and roses with the Ten Commandments, is it?
Oh, definitely not. There's a lot of controversy surrounding them as well.
Right, they've been used to justify some pretty harmful things throughout history.
Absolutely. And it's important to acknowledge those criticisms and to engage with them honestly.
Totally. So, on the one hand, we've got these enduring principles that have shaped our world.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, we've got these potential pitfalls and controversies.
The complex legacy, that's for sure.
It is, and it raises a lot of questions about how we interpret and apply these ancient words in our modern world.
Exactly. It's a conversation that's worth having.
It definitely is. And it's a conversation we're going to keep having right after the break.
Sounds good. So where were we?
We were talking about some of the criticisms of the Ten Commandments.
Right, yeah, because it's not all, positive and rosy.
No, it's definitely a mixed bag.
It is, yeah. Some people find that whole emphasis on obedience and punishment a bit outdated.
Yeah, it can feel a little bit like do as you're told or else.
Right, exactly. Like it doesn't really fit with our modern ideas about individual freedom and critical thinking.
Yeah, it feels a bit stifling, doesn't it?
It can, especially in a society that values things like autonomy and personal expression.
And then there's a whole issue of certain commandments being used to justify harmful practices.
Yes, that's a really important point to bring up.
Especially when it comes to issues of sexuality and gender.
Exactly. Throughout history, interpretations of the commandments, particularly those related to sexual morality, have been used to control and marginalize certain groups.
It's like they've been weaponized in a way.
Right. And we can't ignore that. We have to acknowledge that dark side of their legacy.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's that whole debate about the separation of church and state.
Oh, yeah. That one always gets people fired up.
It does. Should the Ten Commandments be displayed in public spaces, like schools or courthouses?
It's a really tricky issue.
It is, because on the one hand, you have those who see it as an important reminder of shared moral values.
Right. They argue that it's a foundation for our legal system, a symbol of our cultural heritage.
But on the other hand, there are those who are concerned about imposing religious beliefs on those who don't share them.
Exactly. Especially in a diverse society like ours, where we have so many different faiths and beliefs.
So it's like, where do you draw the line?
Right. It's about finding that balance between respecting religious freedom and maintaining a secular public sphere.
It's definitely a tough one. So even though the Ten Commandments are ancient, they're still sparking some very modern debates.
They are. It's like they're this thread connecting the past to the present.
Raising all these big questions about religion, ethics, the role of government.
And they force us to confront some really fundamental issues about right and wrong, about individual freedom versus societal good, about the role of religion in public life.
Yeah, it's not just some dusty old scroll. It's like they're still alive and kicking.
Exactly. They're a living document that continues to shape our world in ways we might not even realize.
Well, so we've talked about the individual commandments, we've talked about their historical impact, we've talked about their relevance in a modern context, but what about their potential for harm?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
And I think it's one that we need to grapple with honestly and openly.
How do we reconcile those seemingly contradictory aspects? The enduring wisdom, A&D, the potential for harm?
It's a tough one, that's for sure.
It is. I mean, how do we learn from the past without repeating its mistakes?
Right, how do we apply these ancient principles to the complexities of the 21st century without falling into those same traps of dogma and exclusion?
It's like we want to draw inspiration from them, but we also want to be mindful of the ways in which they've been misused.
Exactly, it's a delicate balancing act.
It is, and I don't think there are any easy answers.
No, I don't think there are either. But maybe that's the point.
What do you mean?
Maybe the whole point is to engage with these complex questions, to wrestle with these ideas, to have these difficult conversations.
So it's not about shying away from the tough stuff.
No, it's about leaning into it. It's about embracing the messiness, the contradictions.
Because if we try to oversimplify things, if we try to avoid the uncomfortable truths, then we're not really engaging with the full weight of this text, are we?
We're not. And we're missing out on an opportunity to learn and grow.
Okay, so we're embracing the complexity, the nuances.
Here you are.
But where does that leave us? What are we supposed to do with all of this?
Well, for starters, I think it requires critical thinking. We can't just take these commandments at face value.
Right, we have to question them, we have to analyze them, we have to put them in context.
Exactly. We have to consider the historical context, the different interpretations, the potential for both good and harm.
So it's not about following them blindly, it's about engaging with them thoughtfully.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's about asking questions, challenging assumptions, and forming our own informed opinions.
Okay, so critical thinking is key.
It is. But I think it also requires empathy.
Empathy, okay. How so?
Well, we need to understand how these commandments have impacted different people throughout history.
And how they continue to impact people today.
Exactly. We need to be sensitive to the experiences of those who have been marginalized or harmed in the name of these principles.
So it's about recognizing that these commandments have real-world consequences.
They do, both positive and negative.
And that we need to be mindful of that as we engage with them.
Exactly.
Okay.
So critical thinking, empathy, those are two key ingredients, I think.
They are. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to pose a question to you listening out there.
Yeah. What's that?
What stands out to you about all of this? What resonates with you?
What makes you go, I need to think about that some more?
Because honestly, we've only scratched the surface here.
There are so many layers to this topic, so much to explore.
And we encourage you to continue that exploration on your own.
Yeah, do some research, read different perspectives, have conversations with people who hold different views.
And most importantly, think critically and empathetically about what these ancient words mean to you in the 21st century.
That's what it's all about.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll catch you next time for another thought-provoking exploration.
See you then.
Yeah, it really is a tough one. How do we take those good parts and not repeat, the bad stuff?
Right. How do we learn from those mistakes and apply these principles in a way that's, beneficial and not harmful?
Especially in today's world, it's so different from when these were, first written down.
Absolutely. I mean, the world has changed so much, but I think those core values are still, relevant and important.
They are, but it's figuring out how to apply them in a way that makes sense for us now.
Right. And I think that's where, the critical thinking and empathy come in.
Yeah, we were talking about that before the break.
We were. And I think it's so important to, to not just blindly accept or reject these commandments,
Right.
but to really engage with them, wrestle with them, and see what insights we can glean from them.
So it's not about just, following the rules because they're the rules.
No, it's about understanding the principles behind the rules.
And figuring out how those principles can guide us today.
Exactly. Because I think there's a lot of wisdom to be found in these ancient texts.
There is, but we have to be careful not to, to take them out of context or to use them to justify things that are harmful.
Right. We have to be mindful of the potential for both good and bad.
Okay, so we're embracing the complexity, we're thinking critically, we're being empathetic.
Yes.
But where does that leave us? Like, what are we supposed to do with all of this?
Well, I think it starts with, asking questions.
Okay.
Not being afraid to challenge the status quo, to think for ourselves.
So not just accepting things at face value.
Exactly. Dig deeper, look at the historical context, consider different interpretations.
Be curious.
Yes, be curious, be open-minded, but also be critical.
And don't be afraid to have those tough conversations.
Exactly, because that's how we learn and grow.
It is. And, as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with a final thought. We've talked about a lot today, the individual commandments, their history, their impact, the controversies.
Right.
But ultimately, it's up to each of us to decide what these principles mean to us,
I agree.
how they resonate with our own values and beliefs.
And how we choose to live them out in our own lives.
Exactly. So as you go about your day, your week, your life,
Yeah.
think about the 10 Commandments, not just as some ancient text,
But as a living document
source of wisdom
and a challenge
to be better, to do better.
to create a more just and compassionate world.
Well said. And on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another thought-provoking exploration of history, culture, and ideas.
Until then, keep thinking critically, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going.